In his first book, Jerald Walker wrote about fighting through the stereotypes and systemic racism that surrounded him as a young adult on the south side of Chicago. In his second, he focused on growing up black in a segregated white supremacist Doomsday cult. His latest work is called How to Make a Slave and Other Essays, which was a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award for Nonfiction, and the title of which comes from Frederick Douglass's famous line, "You've seen how a man was made a slave, you shall see how a slave was made a man." In it, Walker tackles racism in subtler but no less pervasive forms, from a restaurant accidentally on purpose losing his family's dinner reservation to a man white-splaining oppression and the challenge of raising sons in a Boston suburb where 96% of the residents were white. Jerald Walker joins me now. He's also professor of creative writing at Emerson College. Jerald, it's great to meet you, and congratulations on an absolutely fabulous book.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you are, too. So you're in the Iowa Writers' Workshop. James Alan McPherson trashes your piece in class. You can't sleep, so you demand a meeting. And I should say a student demands a meeting of the first African-American to win a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So what was the criticism, and how did that meeting change your life?
Well, put in that context, I feel pretty bad about it now, but I felt bad about it at the time. What happened was I wrote what I thought was a pretty good story that captured the essence of the South Side of Chicago. And Jim McPherson pointed out that what I was doing was trading in stereotypes. And I was focusing on the negative aspects that surround African Americans, but not the positive aspects that enabled someone like me to make it from that community to his classroom.
So he would, I know you don't want to speak for him, but I'll ask you anyway. I assume he would say that the media does the same thing, portrays African Americans as either victims or victimizers, but rarely talks about life and joy and those sort of things, right?
And he would be correct. He would say that, and he would be correct. But there's a distinction between the role of the media and the role of an artist. And I think Jim wanted me to see that. He wanted me to be less of a crusader against white oppression and to uphold my responsibility as an artist, which is to try to get to the core of humanity and see what I could find that links us as humans. And I was failing that part of my craft.
Well, I felt that link for all 150 or 160 pages. I have to say, it was just fabulous. I mentioned you go in a restaurant, you made a reservation, they allegedly lose it, you end up in the back of the place. Your 12-year-old kid has a seizure. He's in the hospital. The doctor, without examining him, says syphilis could be the cause. A faculty member, after a disagreement in a debate, writes to your department chair and says, as he spoke, meaning you, his face flushed, his hands, which were on the tabletop, formed into fists, and he leaned forward over the table toward other members of the committee. You were a great threat. Yet amidst all this, I hope you'll I laughed so often during this book. Was that McPherson at work in part, or what was that about?
McPherson's a funny guy, and he notes that humor has always been an African-American tradition, that we have always sought to find the things that are funny and the things that are tragic. So that was, but you can't teach someone to be funny. I guess I'm kind of a funny guy by nature. But I after writing that first book, well, not even the first book, after being in the first workshop with James McPherson, and he pointed out about how negative I was being. And I realized that in doing that, I was actually suppressing a part of my own personality, that I gravitate towards things that are humorous and funny and ironic. And I was keeping that out of my work, and I made a point of it to get it in this book.
Well, I asked you to read a paragraph where you did exactly that kind of gravitation, if that's a word. It's the opening paragraph in your essay called Dragon Slayers, and you were kind enough to agree to read it. So would you please?
Happy to do so, sure. I was at a Christmas party with a man who wanted me to hate him. I should hate all whites, he felt, for what they have done to me. I thought hard about what whites have done to me. I was 40, old enough to have accumulated a few unpleasant racial encounters, but nothing of any lasting significance came to mind. The man was astonished at this response. How about slavery, he asked. I explained, as politely as I could, that I had not been a slave. But you feel its effects, he snapped. Racism, discrimination, and prejudice will always be a problem for you in this country. White people, he insisted, are your oppressors. I glanced around the room just as one of my oppressors happened by. She was holding a tray of canapes. She offered me one. I asked the man if, as a form of reparations, I should take two.
Did you take one or did you take two, Jerald? What did you decide to do at the moment?
Well, he stormed off by that point. He didn't stick around to see. I probably took three, but yeah, he was not happy with me.
Do you see a little Dave Chappelle in you or a little of you in Dave Chappelle? Did you see the thing he did on the night that Biden was won enough electoral votes to be president-elect, according to everybody except Donald? Did you see him on SNL that night?
Did see him. It's an honor to have my name in the same sentence as his. But he said something that night that really stuck with me. He said that I can't tell the truth without a punchline in the sentence. And I thought about that. People often don't want to hear the things that need to be said and need to be heard. And you have to sometimes try to find a way to have it go down more easily. And Chappelle is a masterful comic. And I recognize that I say some pretty tough things in this book, but I also try to do it with a smile and sometimes with a laugh if possible, because it's easier in many ways to take the funny with the serious.
Are you a hopeful kind of? I don't know you. I just know your work. And I read the whole book last night in bed, and I came away concluding, I hope not inappropriately, that you're a hopeful person. Are you?
I am. I'm optimistic at times, usually, but I have a paranoid streak, and so I can sometimes, as you notice reading the book, I look for instances of injustice, and I often find them where they don't exist. But I ultimately do believe in the goodness of people, the goodness of humankind, and in the future of this country that will be, dare I say, post-racial.
Well, I'd probably be the last person who would ever want to put a dent in someone's optimism about the future. But we read in places the Black Lives Matter movement was maybe the largest movement in American history. One of their concerns was police reform. And in a state where you work and where I live and work, with one of the most progressive, or at least democratic legislatures in America, 6 or 7 months after legislation was filed, they can't even do police reform. How does that fit into your optimism?
Well, I'm optimistic about humankind generally. I'm not so optimistic about what politicians can achieve in the legislature. So I believe that people want to do the right thing. We're all hoping for the right outcomes, and maybe it's more of people having different paths to that, where the conflicts really come from. But I am optimistic. I mean, you can't deny that over the history of this country, that there has been steady progress in all sorts of social avenues.
Jerald, I just want to tell you, it's one of the best things I've read in a long time. Congratulations, and I'm really thrilled to meet you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much. I appreciate being here.
The book, again, is How to Make a Slave and Other Essays, and I could not recommend it more highly.